Brilliant West Perth centreman Mel Whinnen played more games of waffle football for West Perth than any other player in the history of the competition. Mel was a product of the powerful West Perth junior football competition and played most of his football at school. He joined West Perth in 1960 and debuted as a 17-year-old, playing in the winning grand final team as a reserve in 1960. He took over the centre position when Don Marinko transferred to East Perth in 1961 and held that position for the next 18 seasons. Mel Whinnen played 371 games, all with West Perth. He played 14 state games, including the 1966 Hobart Championships. He was runner-up to the Sandover Medal in 1964 and 1971. He won a Simpson Medal in the 1975 Grand Final. He was fairest and best for West Perth a record 9 times. In all, he polled a total of 140 Sandover Medal votes, which is a record in the competition. He played in 4 premiership sides with West Perth, 1960, 1969, 1971 and 1975. And together with his good mate Bill Dempsey, was awarded an MBE for services to football in 1976. Mel, it's been a very illustrious career. And where did it all start? Were you just a natural footballer right from day one?
Keith, I lived in the North Perth area, very close to the border of East Perth. And became an ardent West Perth supporter very early. I guess I had a dad that had played for East Perth back in the 30s, and I guess he was keen to help me to see how good I'd be at football, and we'd often be kicking in the backyard, and so I guess I learnt to at least to kick in the early days before trying out with the Cobbers Club at one stage as I sort of grew up. Then it was to sort of under 16s in the Westcom competition in those days. It was West Perth combined with East Perth, and subsequently sort of into under 18s, and then finally to thirds and seconds and league. But I guess I learnt a lot of my footy in school days, and a lot of my footy with good coaches in underage competition. I think throughout my career I've been very lucky to have good coaches right through, and they've sort of helped me to develop as I've gone along.
It's some very good attributes. I mean, you were pretty quick for a start. That was a big attribute. And in fact, I think I read that you started as a rover. Yes, I
was a rover in the early days in under 16s, Keith. But I didn't seem to have that natural aptitude. I think as a rover you can find that you can do a lot of running, but you don't get the ball very often, and you've got to have that happy knack of being in the right place at the right time to sort of pick up kicks and keep on your man. I guess by the time I'd got to under 18s, I'd sort of gravitated to the centre position, and that seemed to be where I stayed from there on.
It's quite an incredible situation at West Perth. The way I read it, they seem to have in 30 years, say from 1945 to 1977 when you retired,
right,
only 3 regular centremen. They had Johnny Lockridge straight after the war, then Don Marinko, and then when he went off to East Perth, Mel Whinnen for 18 years.
Yes, it is quite unbelievable, isn't it, to think that over that long period of time. And I guess I owe a lot to people like Don Marinko, because when I came down to West Perth in 1960, Don was the permanent centreman at that stage. In actual fact, he came off the ground in the finals. We played in the second semi, I think it was, and then the grand final in 1960. And I think he feigned injury at the end of both those games to allow me to come on for 10 minutes or so and just get the feel of what finals footy was all about, because as we all realise, finals footy is another step up from the ordinary day-to-day footy, and then of course, well, I guess I imagined that I was probably going to be a rover at West Perth if ever I was going to do any good, with Don Marinko being set in the centre position. And then fortunately for me, I suppose, Don went to East Perth in 1961, as you previously mentioned, and I was lucky to be in the right place at the right time there.
Well, how did you get to West Perth? Arthur Oliver was the coach there, and you had him for your first 4 seasons with West Perth. Were you invited down or just wandered down?
Keith, I guess in those days, you know, I lived in the West Perth area. I was an ardent West Perth supporter. I guess in those days, whatever district you were in, you supported the club the district that looked after you. there was never any doubt that I wasn't going to go down to West Perth. I was going to do my best to sort of try and get a game at West Perth. So the North Perth under-16s that I played for was in the West competition. And then I went down to the West Perth under-18s, which was also in the Westcom competition. As I say, West Perth, East Perth combination. So I was always going to be trying my best to get a game at West Perth by hook or by crook.
Yeah, they had a very strong junior competition, didn't they? I mean, sort of running right into the Metropolitan Junior competition where they got so many of their players from Mount Hawthorn Mets. So it was just a gravitation from the under-18s into the league side.
Yes, it was. I guess one thing of significance, Keith, that I remember was in the grand final of the under-18 competition, we were playing, this West Perth under-18 team was playing Maylands. We drew in the first grand final that we played, and then we won the second grand final by a point. So I guess West Perth and East Perth were both very strong competitions at that stage. We had some players that sort of went on to be very good league players subsequent to that.
Do you remember your first game?
No, I don't remember much about the first game.
Clem on August the 6th.
Was it?
I think.
August the 6th, 1960.
I think so, yeah, and I think you were playing about your 5th game when you got to the grand final. And that must have been a hell of a thrill to be selected in the grand final side, Mel.
Yeah, well, Keith, I guess I was on cloud nine, I think, for all of 1960, because in 1959 I'd been playing under-18s, and in 1960 I came down and I played a few games of thirds, a few games of seconds, and a few games of league. You couldn't have predicted in your wildest dreams that you were going to be playing in a grand final the first year that you'd rolled up at a league club. So I think I was extremely fortunate or lucky or something, because there were some very, I mean, we won the reserves grand final at Well in that year. So we had a pretty strong club as it was, and so somebody was looking after me, I think.
You remember much about the grand final? I mean, Blue Foley won the Simpson, and that must have been a meritorious performance because he played on Farmer. And yes. I think Ross Ayres kicked 7 goals.
Yeah, I must admit I don't remember a great deal about it, Keith. We were saying before we came on air today, but when you're on as a reserve, it wasn't a very exciting place to be, because, and I think particularly in the finals too, that there's always just that little bit more competition out there. So blokes would go down and up you'd stand and get your gear off, and you'd think it was your turn to go on. Is somebody going to come off? And all of a sudden they'd get up and run around and they'd be off again. So you'd sort of sit down on the seat again and you'd put your gear on and sit there expectantly waiting for somebody else to get hurt.
I suppose we should explain there was no interchange.
There was no interchange in those days. So,
I mean, that's going back a long way now.
Yes, that's right. So I guess, you know, I'm up and down all afternoon until finally, as I say, Don, you know, feigned an ankle injury at the end of both games and allowed me to sort of get a bit of a run. And then when I did come on the field at that stage, just the pace of the game, it was just unbelievable. I guess we were lucky, Don was probably very smart in those days, because he knew we couldn't lose the game, I don't think, in the last 10 minutes. But just the pace of the game, I remember being so unbelievably quick, and a couple of times I think I got near the ball, I might have touched the ball, and the next minute I'm flat on my back, and it really took me some time to sort of get the hang of the speed of the game, which I'd found right through 1960, that going from under-18s to thirds, there was a fair step up in pace. Thirds to seconds, there was a fair step up in pace, and the same from seconds to league, and then the same from league to finals. So
very strong competition, wasn't it, in those days?
It was.
I mean, it wasn't far behind the VFL, which was the senior competition. But the Mel Whinnen, I remember, had this raking drop kick out of the centre of the ground. Yeah, that was a real attribute that you must have honed somewhere along the line. I mean, you were a lovely kicker out of football.
Yeah, yeah, I guess you just do what you do. I mean, I remember some of my idols, like Ray Sorrell, had a lovely raking left foot kick, and you know, a couple of years before I started to play footy, I'm following guys like him, and then not long after I'm playing league football. But yeah, I guess I was lucky. I think my dad taught me the right way to kick the ball very early in the piece, and that was sort of just ground into me, and sort of held me in good stead and perhaps until the towards the end of my career, the drop punt came in, and I found that and the boots became the low cut boots with no hard toes. So the concept of the game changed quite considerably at that stage.
One of my major disappointments when you stopped kicking drop kicks and drop punting.
Yeah.
And I mean, you're a very good drop punter also, but those drop kicks they got there quick. And you're a different kicker to Sorrel. Sorrel got a lot of elevation in his drop kicks, but yours were just a low raking drop kicks. Anyway, 1962 was another season, and the club was favourites to win the premierships in 1962. And Don Rinko had gone, and Ray Gabelich arrived.
Right.
And you ran fifth. You didn't even make the finals, I don't think, that
Didn't
year.
we? Gosh. No, well, we were a team that often relied on some of the Victorian guys that came over. I guess Ray was a guy that had played at West Perth previously, I think, and came back to the club, or had played in Western Australia. So we had, I guess in 1960, we had a sort of a team of champions that was made into a champion team by our coach, Arthur Oliver.
Good coach?
An excellent coach, particularly for me as a young bloke coming in. Excellent coach. But for some reason we couldn't put it all together in 1961.
We had Foley and Gabelich. Had a fair start.
We had a fair sort of a team, if I remember rightly.
Yeah.
And but I guess one of the things that's been a highlight for me over the time, Keith, has been that perhaps over those 18 years, except for one or two of the years, we were always sort of in a position to be fighting for the finals at the end of the season. We mightn't have always made the finals, but over the years we, say even like 1961 where we ran fifth, we must have been in a position to sort of perhaps up until the last or second last game be making the four. And we were a lucky team over that period that...
well, you're a good club. Very
were a
stable
strong
club. And to this day a stable club.
Yeah, well, I think we've always had strong administrations, Keith, and a good player group, and as I say, pretty good coaches.
Yeah. Were your main rivals East Perth? I mean, every side was a rival, but were they your main rivals as written up?
I guess there was always something a little bit different about playing East Perth. You know, I don't know where that originally did start, but certainly it was continued with the Don Marinko business, I think, that went on. But yes, there was always just that little bit more feeling, and it seems to be the way in football these days that a couple of teams sort of find that they fight a bit harder against one another than they do and against the others. But yeah, and I think it still applies today.
Exactly.
That there is that feeling between West Perth and East Perth, and it's always on for young and old.
Well, 62, you scraped into the finals in 62. I don't know whether you can remember, but you lost the last home and away game, and East Perth only had to win the last home and away game to get in, and they lost also.
Right.
So you did scrape into the four in 1962,
right.
And I think, if I remember rightly, you had your you won your first fairest and best medal for the club.
Did I?
So you must have had a pretty good year in 62.
I was a bit lucky in that. Must have been a bit lucky in those days, Keith, because I guess I'd only been at the club a couple of years at that stage. And,
Anyway, 63 was one of those years you missed out again, and you ran fifth. But that was a year when Ray Sorrell did win the Sandover medal. Now, you would have started to come in contact with Ray Sorrell about that stage. How did you find him as an opponent?
Ray was a terrific opponent, Keith. Ray was I've said this a number of times, but Ray was the sort of guy that would talk to you and help you a little bit out on the field as best an opponent could do. I found that rather strange because usually your opponents were there to grab you by the scruff of the neck and make sure you didn't get a kick. Ray was the sort of guy that if he could, he would help you. But he was such a good centreman. He covered a lot of ground. I guess he was a key figure in the East Fremantle sides of those days, and he was a focal point. So as a young bloke sort of not long in the competition, I found I had to try and stop him. I guess perhaps those were the early days of the taggers, I don't know, but I sort of almost had to sacrifice my game playing on a bloke like Ray Sorrell.
Never had a right foot?
Never had a right foot, no. I mean, that's... If you were smart enough, I guess in those days, you knew if you stayed on the right-hand side on the big sweep, you could try and cut him off, and that was one thing you could try and do. But I must have
kick into the pocket.
Yes, that's right. But I must admit, I mustn't have been too successful if he won a Sandover medal. But yeah, always a good bloke to play on, always very competitive, but always very, very fair.
Of interest, your full forward in that year was Ron Evans.
Ron Evans, was it? Right.
Now, chairman of the Australian Football League.
Right. Yeah, well, Ron, I think was our leading goal kicker for 3 or 4 years back in those days.
Well, he kicked 97 that year.
97, did he?
Yeah. And Brian France won your first and best.
First and best, right.
How'd you find Francie? You played in front of him.
Yeah,
Soccer a few to you, did he?
No, well, Francie was a great player, as we know. I remember going away in the I think the '66 Carnival side, and like Francie was the bloke that made, or well, we were both there, I guess. Were you there? Yeah. So if Francie had stayed on the field at 3/4 time in the last game, I think we would have won the Carnival because he'd pulled up lame. He'd done a thigh muscle.
I never knew what happened to him.
Yeah. No,
I mean, he hadn't given Baldock one kick.
No, that's right.
Baldock was an out-and-out champion. Of course, when he went off the field, Baldock and Stewart and that's another story, isn't it?
That's right.
Well, Arthur Oliver finished his 4-year stint and Clive Lewington took over as your coach, just for 1 year. And I played under Clive in state games, and you really had to strain to hear what he was saying. Did you find that with Clive?
Yeah, a very quiet bloke, but I thought he was a very smart coach too, Keith. I can't remember just how we finished that year, but he was a sort of coach that could get all the players in the team together. But for some reason we didn't put it all together. I think we might have just finished in the 4 or just finished out of the 4 that year.
You finished 5th, yeah.
Just finished out of the 4. But yeah, I found him a very good coach. And I suppose he might have only been there for the 1 year because Bob Spargo was in the wings in those days, and I think some promise had been made to Bob. But you know, I certainly would have been quite happy for Clive to stay there. And I guess being a centreman, he provided me with a few tips in those days
wonderful
too.
Person, Clive Lewington.
Wonderful bloke and a wonderful footy player.
I want to take you back to '63 just for a moment because you made your state debut at Subi Oval against Tasmania.
Right.
Can you remember that at all?
I remember that game distinctly, Keith. That day, I think it didn't stop raining from morning till night, and for one of the few times over my footy career, Subi Oval was awash, and then we, to really wrap it all up, we got done. And,
by Tasmania.
By Tassie, so that wasn't a good day.
It was the most disgraceful day. I remember I had to pull out of the side.
Did you?
And I became runner.
That would have been worse than playing, I think.
And in the '63 also, Mel, we lost to Victoria at Subi Oval by just 1 point. I don't know if you remember that or not, but
no, I don't.
It was one of those wonderful... We had wonderful games against Victoria at Subi Oval in those days, didn't we? And, yeah, just 1 point we went down. But I thought you'd remember that debut state game. It
was a cold day, it was a wet day, and then we lost the game fairly convincingly, if I remember rightly. Yeah.
Under Clive Lewington, you were runner-up at Barry Cable. Is that disappointing when you were runner-up to a Sandover medal?
I remember we used to sit out here at Channel 7 somewhere and watch the count. I guess it got very tense towards the finish, thinking that I guess you always went along, like most of the players today, I'm sure, go along and don't give themselves much of a chance. I guess I didn't get really disappointed, Keith. I guess I always sort of assumed that if winning a Sandover medal came along, it was going to be a bit of a bonus. You know, I was always happy to be part of a winning team. That seemed to be the most important thing. You'd sort of battle your insides out for the whole of a season, and if you were lucky enough to make the finals and then the grand final, I think a grand final was always sort of something that was more satisfying than perhaps winning a Sandover medal. But you would have always liked to have won a Sandover medal for sure.
On the night.
On the night. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I guess a couple of times I was runner-up, but the second time not so close. But
the state tour that year, did you play on the Melbourne Cricket Ground? '64.
I think I did, Keith. Yeah.
A real shellacking.
I think I played on the MCG a couple of times, and both times I think they were 30 goals to 3, and yeah, they weren't very pleasant.
We went to Hobart and gave them a shellacking.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And then we went to Adelaide and lost to South Australia, which was pretty par for the course in those days.
That's right. Yeah. But I think the big thing, Keith, in those days that perhaps is a little different to now, that you remember the MCG in the middle of winter was a bit like a skating rink. It certainly was for the wicket area in the middle.
To us?
Yeah. So the Victorians sort of seemed to be, having played on the MCG from time to time, they seemed to develop a skill for handling that mud. But that big wicket area in the middle of the MCG was really like a skating rink, and if you were getting rain during the day, as was always the case in Melbourne, it was awfully difficult to play a decent game of footy, I found.
And it's quite different now. People don't understand, but they've drained the MCG nowadays, and it's more like a conventional oval. But the one you're talking about, to me, it seemed like it had cricket pitch all over the oval.
Right, that's right.
You couldn't pick your legs up after quarter time.
And then also, I don't think they had the grandstands right around the oval as they do, as they used to have.
Yeah.
And you used to get that swirling breeze. And I know on a training night before the game, we'd go out and have a couple of kicks for goal. And when somebody had kicked the ball out to you, on one occasion you'd find the ball would drop 5 metres in front of you. On another occasion you'd say, well, I'm not going to get caught this time. You'd go 5 metres ahead of where you thought it was going to drop, and it would drop 5 metres behind you. So it was always difficult to judge that wind and the ground, of course.
I never got a lot of kicks on the Melbourne cricket ground, but every time I got the ball I felt as though I was kicking into the breeze. Did you have that effect?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. Well, 65, and you're becoming a very experienced player at this stage, and Bob Spargo took over. A very interesting coach and a good state player also.
He was.
And he got in the finals again, and he lost the first semi to Ishmael by 3 goals that year. And I think, if I remember rightly, he had some injuries to top players in Spargo's first year.
Yeah, I think we might have. Keith, sorry I can't remember the details, but...
And another significant factor, I think Brian Foley retired about that time too.
He did.
So
I think we had a couple of our older chaps sort of gave it away around about that time, because I think in Bob's second year, following that, we had an influx of new young fellas. And we had guys like Alan Watling and Norm Nell and Stephen Smith, who were just coming into footy. I think really the supporters and the administration sort of wrote off the year and sort of said, well, this is a build-up year for us. We've lost some good players. We're just getting some new young fellas coming in. We're really not going to do very well, but it'll be an interesting year. And I think we sort of fell over the line into the first semi-final and got rolled fairly readily in that first semi-final.
Yeah, well, 3 goals. And Ishmael were a strong side then. I remember that year also we beat the Vicks at Subi Oval. I think you were reserve in that game, weren't you?
Yeah, I think I might have been, Keith.
That was a pretty exciting game.
It was.
We won the Saturday game and lost the
Tuesday game.
But the interstate games were quite spectacular in those days.
They were, weren't they? Very, very popular.
1966, well, that was one big year for you, wasn't it? I mean, you only ran third. You won the first semi-final and lost the preliminary final. But it brings to mind another champion with East Perth in Sid Jackson. And another good footballer, Mel.
Yeah, well, Keith, I guess when you sort of fronted up in the centre each week, there was never a sort of a second-rate player that you seemed to play on, and I guess Sid was a little different than most players, because you could contain him for 3 quarters of a game, and then for 1 quarter he could just take off, and there was no way of stopping him. He was a bloke that had plenty of pace. He had plenty of agility, and in 1 quarter he could kick 3 or 4 goals and win a game for East Perth. So you couldn't afford to relax on him at any stage. I mean, you'd think you had him covered. After 3 quarters, I mean, you'd stop him having a kick for 3 quarters, and then in the last quarter he'd go mad. But a guy with so much ability, and obviously showed that when he went to Melbourne.
Yeah, he's a wonderful player. I remember that first semi-final in 1966, because you played a blinder. I don't know whether you can remember or not, but you were best on ground by a street, and you played a really, really big game. But 1966, I know it was the Hobart Championships, but you married Dawn 1966, I think.
1966, yes, that's our wedding date. Yes, that's right.
And 2 daughters?
We have 2 daughters, yes. Yes, we had our daughter Debbie at the end of '66, and Jodie came along in 1969. So, yes.
That's been another good decision, marrying Dawn.
Yeah, well, that's there's no doubt about that, Keith, as I'm sure you know, that you don't have any success in anything in life if you haven't got a good partner that backs you up. And I guess to be able to sort of survive 18 years of footy meant that Dawn's looked after me pretty well over that time. So I very much appreciate the support and encouragement she's given me. Yeah. And the kids, of course, because they always came along with Dawn to the footy.
You look very contented at the moment. Now, the Hobart Championships, I think you got injured, didn't you? You were at Hobart, and did you get injured during that time?
Yeah, I don't know whether I was playing well enough. I didn't make the last day, Keith. I played in a couple of the early games, but yeah, I don't think I was picked actually at the end. I would have loved to have been in that last game, but
it was a very exciting time, wasn't it? Like just football, nothing else for 2 weeks in Hobart with a good team. Extremely
exciting, and Kevin Murray was our coach in those days, and Kevin was a very good people person and kept us all together and kept us warm around the campfire there. Hobart being very cold like it was, we'd only be too happy to get back to the fire after our training. But yeah, for 2 weeks it'd be nothing but football and brought the best out in a lot of people.
Can you remember the early morning training sessions? I think we drew the short straw and had to train about 8:30 in the morning.
Did we?
And there was ice on the ground, and everybody really was too frightened to touch the football in case their fingers broke. Right. You remember those cold mornings?
Well, I remember before the games, and probably before training too, we would dip our hands and feet into water before we pulled our socks on, into hot water. So we had to warm our feet up before we actually put the boots on. But funnily enough, you often played in a short sleeve Guernsey. You didn't sort of feel it on your arms, but yeah, it was freezing cold.
Well, one of your teammates, Colin Hebbard, took us to a wholesale overcoat place, and I remember half a dozen of us bought these big overcoats. I mean, it's the only overcoat I ever bought in my life, and I don't think I used it after Hobart.
No, Hobart is a very cold place, but lovely place, but very cold.
But we should have won the carnival.
We should have won that.
It was a real disaster, wasn't it? Yeah. 67, and Bob Spargo, you ran 4th and lost the first semi-final. But you had another very good year, fairest and best, I think for the 3rd time, 1967, so you were sort of running hot, and that's quite a feat, Mel, because as you say, you were running into some pretty useful centremen each week. It's not as though you had one that couldn't play. I mean, each time you went into the centre, there was someone who could play the game.
Yeah, there was some awfully good centremen over the period I played, Keith. I mean, as you mentioned early in the piece, start off against guys like Ray Sorrell and John Todd and those sort of fellas who were sort of icons in those days even. And then you sort of came up against so many good guys like the Peter Mannings and the Pat Daltons and Tony Sangallis, and there were just so many good guys that were playing centre in those days. It was a real challenge each week. You couldn't afford to relax at all.
And Bob Spargo never won a premiership. How did you find him as a coach, Mel? Was he up to the standard of the previous, like Lewington and Arthur Oliver?
Bob found it very hard to coach, Keith. He wasn't a bloke that could speak in front of a group very easily. And I guess in those times he played very well in the state games, but I don't remember him playing that well over the course of a full year. So he found it very hard at coaching. He tried very hard, but I didn't feel he was a natural coach. And I guess being a playing coach too, of course, there's not too many people that have been successful playing coaches over time. And it's, you know, a guy that was a successful playing coach was, of course, Polly. But
well, we're getting into Polly now.
Yeah, we're coming to Polly. But yeah, Bob found it very hard to coach, to actually switch off from playing at the end of a quarter and to have to pass a different message on to the players. But he was a guy that sort of had his heart in the right place, tried very hard, but and helped to develop those new fellas that came in. I think in whatever it was, 63 or 64.
Well, he went through from 65 to 67.
65, was it?
Well,
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So we had a nucleus of good players when Polly sort of came along.
Was that exciting when Polly was appointed? I mean, how was he accepted? How was the appointment accepted by the players?
Yeah, that was a huge thing, Keith, that Polly was appointed. I don't think anybody in the player strength had ever accepted that he was going to be coach. But sure enough, he was appointed, and he was a guy, Polly, and I guess still is, a guy that's got some pretty radical thinking in football, and he'd thought about being a coach for a long period of time, and he then got to the stage of implementing all those things that he'd thought about. I think that's where Bob Spargo got caught out. He was playing and all of a sudden he was coach, whereas Polly had thought a lot about it. So Polly brought a lot of new things in to our game here in Western Australia, and West Perth in particular, that hadn't been tried before. His coaching methods were quite different. His team loyalty was sort of quite different than what we'd expected before. I mean, you and I grew up in a period where footy was a game, and you know, you trained twice a week, and that was mainly sort of kick to kick, and all of a sudden we had a pretty tough regime came in with Polly, and you know, Polly's motto was in those days that you played as you trained, and it's just like brushing your teeth in the morning. You get out of bed and you just don't think about it. You go into the bathroom and brush your teeth. He wanted you to just go out on a Saturday and play as you'd trained. So if you trained hard, you did the bumping, you did the tackling, you did the ball handling, you were going to do that all the same on a Saturday as you'd done it before. But the training regime was sort of considerably tougher than it had been before, and there was quite a bit of reaction to that in the footy club when he first came down, because it was I guess for West Perth, it was the first stage of becoming a more professional footballer. And you know, with the guys that sort of we had to come down on Sunday morning and train. Sunday morning was usually sort of round the keg. We had to come down Sunday morning for training, and guys would get down there late, and they'd suffer some penalties, and they'd used to be saying to Polly, well, hang on, Pol, I've got a family life and a social life to lead. You know, surely that comes before football. And Polly made it very clear that nothing came before football. So
he played brilliantly.
Oh,
like he palled up with Bill Dempsey, and they were a very formidable and tough combination.
Polly utilised the players very well. He worked well with Bill, but he also utilised perhaps our more fringe players in Alan Watling and Stephen Smith. Polly would go in and get the ball and fire out the big hand pass, and utilise those players better than they'd ever been used.
Well, you responded well to his coaching, because you won another first and best, and you won 18 games out of 21, you know, that year.
Yeah, we were.
But you lost final round. You lost the second semi, and you lost the preliminary final. Second semi to Perth by 5 goals, then you lost the preliminary final to East Perth by 3 points. How did Polly take that?
Yeah, not very well, particularly as I guess we were hot favourites really to win that flag, and then to sort of just take a dive in the finals like we did. And I guess, as we've said, in finals the game is different, and that's the same for coaching as well as for playing. And so I think Polly took a bit out of that himself. He learned a bit in coaching a side once it gets into the finals. And sort of when we got there the next year, if we made any mistakes in 68, we didn't make them in 69. We had a good year.
You were a tough side, 69.
69 was a good year.
Yeah. And everyone seemed to be a tough... I mean, you beat East Perth by, what, a dozen goals or so in the grand final.
Right.
It was really a cakewalk, but it was just a matter. You were talking about Bob Spargo finding it difficult to be a playing coach. Well, Polly seemed to relish the idea, and he was getting on in years, you know, like 34, 35.
Still pretty fit in those days, Keith. He trained very hard. He did training at home as well, I think he adopted the principle that if he could get the ball and get it out, we had the players that were quick enough to sort of get the ball on, and he had a happy knack in packs of being able to sort of drop onto the ball, he'd grab it, and he'd fire out that renowned hand pass that we know.
I think you won the first best in 68. Was he first and best in 69? I've got a feeling he was.
I think he might have been, Keith,
you know,
yes.
34 years of age. and he'd led with aplomb, so
Magic.
it would have been a high time. Dempsey won the Simpson. I think Bill Dempsey won the Simpson that year, and that's the toughest I've ever seen Bill Dempsey play.
Was it?
In that grand final? Yeah. You don't remember?
No, well, I just remember Polly had the respect of everybody, Keith. I mean, he was a tough master, but he had the respect of all the players, and you know, they would run through the proverbial brick wall. Yeah. They really would.
And then you fell on a heap in 1970. You never made the finals, and
didn't we? Right.
Finished 6th, I think. I mean, it was a really bad year, and you almost started favourite, but you won another fairest and best. I think you won 3 fairest and best in a row there at one stage in your career. So, but to win 9, Mel, it's a great achievement, isn't it, really, when you think of it? I think Robert Wiley might have won 8 at Perth, something like that, and Cable, I think, the same. But to win 9 fairest and best, like half the years you played footy, you won fairest and best. So.
Cost me a fortune paying off the blokes that were picking the fairest and best each week, Keith, I can promise you. Yeah.
Well, you were 71, you came back and won the premiership again, and beat East Perth again.
Yeah, it was an interesting year, if I remember rightly, Keith. We had a fair change of players between 70 and 71, so it wasn't or at least 69 and 71. So it was, and I think East Perth had beaten us every time that year. So we certainly weren't favourites to win the flag going into the grand final, if I remember rightly.
You lost the second semi.
We lost the second semi, did we?
Yeah, and then you won the preliminary final by 2 points against Perth.
Did we? Gosh.
So but then the grand final was a 5-goal result. A little guy named Shane Sheridan won the Simpson medal. Do you remember him winning the medal?
Yeah, I do. Yes, yeah. Shane was a good player, Keith. He put in a lot of good years at West Perth as a rover, and very, very quick player.
Because players like Shane Sheridan would appreciate the Polly being around.
Sure, yes.
You won your fairest and best for the 6th time.
Did I? Right.
But that's runner-up to the Sandover medal, to David Hollands. How did you view all that? I mean, it was a bit controversial, to say the least.
Yeah, well, I guess you get involved with the media a little bit with these things. There have been all sorts of predictions made about who was going to win things before the count was taken, and perhaps you do get a little bit of feeling that you might be up there in the count. That as it worked out, you know, ran second, 10 votes behind the winner. So it's like running 21st, I think.
I always felt sorry for David Hollands, because he was the sort of the scapegoat, wasn't he? And but
he'd had a top season. There's no doubt about that. He's a good player. Yeah, and probably didn't stay in the game that long, David, if I remember rightly.
And I think that controversy might have played its part also.
Might have played.
Well, Polly finished the 4-year stint, 2 premierships. He'd be pretty well satisfied. And do you know if he left off his own accord, or had he had enough? Or I mean, Peter Stewart took over as your coach just for 1 year.
I think he was ready to retire, at least from playing in those days, Keith. I think he was finding it very hard physically to keep going, and so I think he was probably happy to call it a day. I always had
a feeling that he would have liked to have gone on as a non-playing coach. I don't know. I haven't heard that reported, but I just had a feeling that he would have liked to have gone on.
I don't know, Keith. Yeah.
But Peter Stewart, centre-half back, quite a brilliant footballer.
Yeah. I think Peter was perhaps a little bit like a Bob Spargo, that he didn't find coaching easy either. He, tremendous player at centre-half back, raking long kick, as we remember. Spiral torpedo, which would sort of land down in the goal square from centre-half back when he got onto them. But I don't think he found coaching easy either, and I guess he was sort of in the middle of his playing days at that stage, and all of a sudden he was coach. And perhaps you also need good offsiders as well. I can't remember who we had as offsiders in those days, but yeah, I think we still were competitive that year, but we were never going to be a...
You made the 4.
Made the 4, did we?
Made the 4, yeah. But he had a very demanding... I mean, he ran a liquor store, didn't he? And he was on his feet all day, and... I used to go in there sometimes, and he was always there, actually, working. So it wasn't though he had the business. And when you're walking around on your feet all day, it's not all that good for football. No,
it's a very physical game, the old liquor store business.
Well, Dennis Jones took over.
Yes.
And there's another story. You were runners-up to Subi in 1973, was it? You lost by 7 goals. How did you find
That's a story in itself, I think, Keith. Yes. Well, as the story goes, of course, that we'd beaten Subi every time we'd played them over the course of the year. I think we'd beaten them in the scratch games, and we'd beaten them in the ordinary games. We'd beaten them in the second semi-final, presumably, every time we'd played them during the year. So we'd won it before we went out for the grand final. And Subi had decided that whatever had happened in the past wasn't going to happen again. They decided they were going to give it everything. And
was Button at Subi?
No, it was Ross Smith.
Oh, Ross Smith, that's right.
Coach.
He taken over. Yeah, of course.
That
was their first premiership for, what, 24 years?
Something like that, yes. Yeah. I always remember our supporters, Keith, in the club rooms on that Saturday night sort of saying, well, we're happy that Subi won if it was going to be anybody that beat us, which was quite strange because usually everybody's down in the dumps after you lose a grand final, but our supporters were not too bad because they thought, well, that's great for Subi to win a premiership after so long.
Yeah, it was good for football because Subi had really been in the doldrums, hadn't they? And you won another fairest and best, and that was 4 in a row. So you had a really good year under Dennis Jones. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, well, I think, Keith, also that you mentioned about how Polly had gone in '68 after losing a grand final that we were set to win. That really destroyed Dennis Jones that day. Because I think he'd had a tough build-up to coaching in South Australia. He'd mainly been sort of developing younger players in the teams that he'd coached. And all of a sudden, in his first year at coaching in WA at West Perth, here we were going into a grand final, not hot favourites, we were boiling favourites. There was no doubt that we were going to win. And then having lost, of course as you're going to tell me now, we went straight to stone motherless last in the worst year that we had over the
6 wins only for the year.
6 wins, was it? So it was sort of quite a disastrous year in 1974 after such a good year in 1973, just having lost the grand final.
It does show the power of coaching though, doesn't it? I mean,
it does.
They're very important, not maybe as man managers as much as anything else.
Right, yeah. One thing I must mention about the grand final in '73 was that, just as a personal thing, because I was playing on Peter Featherby that day, and that wasn't the best sort of occupation you could have in the world on a Saturday afternoon, running around after Peter Featherby, because it really was running around after Peter Featherby. But Ross Smith had decided that if I ever got too close to Peter Featherby or got too close to the ball, that Ross Smith was going to tackle me. So every time I got close to the ball, Ross Smith was right on my tail. So I was battling to sort of keep up with Peter Featherby over the course of the afternoon, and every time I'd get close to the ball, Ross would throw me to the ground. So I had one of the toughest days in footy that I can remember, because as you remember, Peter Featherby, he
never stopped getting it.
He just never stopped. I don't think he was that quick, but he was a guy that had tremendous stamina, and to keep up with him, you only had to stop for a bit of a blow, and then all of a sudden you'd look and he'd be 30 metres down the field. And
well, he would be difficult for you, Mel, because I've always thought good centremen get their kicks in the centre of the ground, and you did that. When you were playing centre, I mean, if the square was in your day, you would have got 90% of your kicks in that square.
Right.
Peter Featherby wasn't like that, was he?
No,
He'd get on the half-back flank, on the half-forward flank. So he would roam far and wide. But it was a great compliment that Ross Smith paid you that attention. You ever looked at it that way?
No, I didn't look at it. I was most disappointed at the end of the game, I can promise you. I was pretty sore and sorry.
You're ready for a beer too.
Well and truly.
Well, Graham Campbell, now there's another revelation for the club. He came out of the woodwork, and I think, had he been in South Australia? Or
he had, yes.
Fitzroy, South Australia, and then...
Yes.
And he took the place by storm, didn't he, Graham? Won the premiership first year.
Yes, he was a very good communicator, very good motivator. And a lot of people ask you, how does he compare with Polly Farmer, two completely different people. But he always remember, Keith, that before the game, when he'd give the pre-match talk and some of the supporters would come in and listen to him, they'd want to be throwing off their shirts to come out on the ground with us because he was so motivational in the way that he spoke. But Polly always used the philosophy that there wasn't much that he could do to motivate you. You had to motivate yourself so that your motivation continued out on the ground once you got out there. If you were motivated, if you motivated yourself, that would keep you going for the whole day. He would talk about the tactics that you were going to use, but you had to motivate yourself. Graham Campbell used a lot of motivation, and you'd be on a high by the time you hit the field. Absolutely.
Did he fire you up, Mel?
He certainly did. I can promise you. We used to. I mean, there was a start of those. We'd have the Rocky themes and the Rocky movies that we'd go to. Quite a difference to what we'd had before. There was none of that with Polly or any of the previous coaches. But yeah, a strong motivator, and I guess pretty good tactician as it worked out too. But we'd lost a few games sort of by significant amounts that first year with Graham.
Yeah.
But we never lost 2 in a row, if I remember rightly. Even though we might lose by 10 goals one week, we'd never lose the next game. And we must have held 2 together by the time we got to the finals.
Well, you were last to first, but you not only won the grand final, you won by 17 goals. 17
goals.
You beat South Fremantle by 17 goals. I mean, I would think that was a record margin. I don't think anyone's ever lost a grand final, won a grand final by that much before. You won the Simpson medal?
Yes.
And that must have been very gratifying?
Yes, it was a great day, Keith. Yeah.
And you won the first and best for the 9th time?
I think a couple of sympathy votes there somewhere along the line.
Coaches didn't make much difference. You won first and best under all of them.
Yeah, well, as I say, I was very lucky. We had good coaches, Keith. All the coaches were very good.
So very high time, the Graham Campbell time. Although the 76 you ran 4th. You lost the first semi to you lost to Perth by 10 goals actually.
Did we?
Yeah, I remember that was a real debacle. 77 was your last season.
Yes.
And you ran 3rd. You won the first semi, you beat East Perth and lost the preliminary final by 3 goals. And so that would have been your last game.
That's it. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I think we were in with a chance against that was East Fremantle, wasn't it?
Yeah, you lost by 3 goals.
But we just didn't have it on the day that day, and that was the lucky last. Yeah.
Did you know that was going to be the last, or did?
Yep.
So you'd made that decision.
Made that decision. It was the last year. I reckon at 35, Keith, I'd been pretty fortunate to be able to keep going for that long, and you know, I guess. It's got even tougher now for the guys. The footy's a lot quicker and a lot tougher than it was in our day. I think we probably would have still been competitive in days today, you and I. But yeah, I mean the body starts to the bones were aching and creaking by the end of 1977, Keith. So,
well, you had a wonderful career, and as I said before, I always admired you as a centreman because you got your kicks in the centre of the ground, and there's a lot of centremen running around who got kicks all over the ground, and they didn't really win their kicks where it counted most, and you did that. And it'd be interesting over all those years to know how many kicks you actually had, Mel. And you wonder why your legs ache now.
Wonder why the knees are gone on me now, Keith.
Mel, who's the best coach you ever played under?
Well, it's very difficult to answer that, Keith. I think that you know, you with Arthur Oliver in the early days when you're sort of just coming into football, and sort of later in the time you go through Polly Farmer and then Graham Campbell. Very difficult to make a comparison. They were all such good coaches. Polly was probably the best tactician of all. I mean, 2 premierships in 4 years sort of speaks for itself, I think. Polly had thought a lot about coaching and put a lot of those ideas into practice, but very, very hard to sort of really make a comparison.
Were you going to go for one? No. Is there a standout game in your career? No, Keith, I don't think so. The premierships are really the thing that sort of are the highlights of your career, I think, that because as you would remember that sort of battling for the whole of a year and overcoming injuries and
getting through all the problems that you had over the course of a year, and then finally making it to a grand final and winning a grand final, and then getting back with the supporters at the end of the year. So I guess the four. I mean, I don't remember too much about the 1961. I was pretty young in those days, but certainly 69, 71, and 75 were big times in my footy career. Probably the best times of my footy career. But I suppose probably the biggest thing that I've seen in my footy career perhaps is just the MBE.
Yes.
You know, I guess perhaps I'm a bit of a monarchist,
Right.
but just being fortunate enough to be in line for an MBE is just something that's unbelievable.
Wonderful achievement. Who was your toughest opponent, Mel?
Keith, on their day, all the guys that I played on were, as I say, you never got an easy day. You played on, I mean, there's guys like, I always come back to a guy like Peter Amaranti, who probably wasn't considered one of the top players in our footy, but he sacrificed his game whenever I played on him. So whenever I got near the ball, he would be tagging me and dragging me to the ground. He was always hard to beat. Peter Manning was hard to beat. Pat Dalton. You know, Pat Dalton won a Sandover medal. Peter Featherby, I mean, I wish I'd had a pedometer on my leg when I used to chase him. Peter was such a solid player and a focus for Subi in those days. That, and then back in the early days, you know, the guys that we've mentioned, the Sorrells and the Todds.
Marshall, I suppose you had to go at him.
Dennis Marshall, yes, played on Dennis Marshall. Yeah, but some wonderful players, been real icons in our game, but they're all hard on their day. I mean, you might even, if you were lucky enough, you might get on top of them one week, but you'd know the next time that you came on them, you were in for an even tougher battle than you'd had previously. So, yeah, just it's very hard to pick one.
Best overall footballer you've ever seen? That's a tough question, I know. It's meant to be tough.
Best overall footballer. Well, I guess you mentioned Dennis Marshall. I mean, a very complete footballer, Dennis. A bloke that could play, I guess, in any position on the ground. He could, you know, play anywhere down the centre of the ground, I guess, from full forward to full back and in the centre. Very complete footballer. I guess there must have been a few around like that over the time too, Keith. Yeah, no other names come to mind at the moment, but Dennis Marshall would have to be pretty hard to beat as a complete footballer.
You happy with the game today?
I love to watch footy these days, Keith. I still watch it. I'm a football nut on a weekend. I watch as many games as I possibly can. Always have a little bit of a leaning to the Eagles. I think footy's still good. It's become a different game, quite different to what we played. Very difficult to umpire as well these days. 3 umpires? Yeah, I'm not too keen on the 3 umpires. I think that leads to a bit of confusion. But yeah, I mean, the game has got very fast. It's got very scientific. But it's still, with that body contact and the high marking, it's still got a very interesting game. And it's the best game in the world, there's no doubt about it.
Well, Mel Whinnen retired in 1977, 371 games, 22 final round games, 4 premierships, 5 grand finals and 14 state games, and the winner of an MBE in 1976. Congratulations on your contribution to football.
Thank you very much, Keith.
Yeah, it looks very good up on the screen there. Yeah,
Did I? Gosh.
About an hour.
Been there,
About
sure.
an hour. Just got a few pictures to put on. Yeah, sure.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah.
Yeah, well done, Mel.
Thanks.